Hey guys, in today's video I'm very excited to be going over in depth my first of two games I played against Nigel Richards, the greatest Scrabble player of all time, at this summer's Scrabble Players Championship. The second game will be covered in a future video, hopefully in the coming weeks. Now, this was a pretty important game. This was round 15, so right around the middle of the event, and it was the first game of the third day of the championship. I had had a very strong first 2 days, jumping out to a 12-2 start, putting me 2 games ahead of the field. Nigel had not had such a great start by his standards, starting 9-5, but as everyone knew all too well, Nigel was very far from out of this tournament. That being said, this was still an important game, and one both of us wanted to win quite badly. I was first, and I got a very good omen, pulling the blank as my first tile out of the bag. Certainly a nice start to the game, especially against the GOAT. The rest of my rack materialized pretty nicely, D-E-G-H-R-T blank. There are 2 available 7-letter bingos here, both of which I saw almost immediately, and both make the blank an I, girthed and righted. Girthed is a better play, as it scores 80 points by virtue of putting the H on the double letter score. Because righted has the H in the middle of the word, there's actually no way to play it such that the H hits the double letter score. For instance, I could play it here, but that only gets 76 points, and there's really no good reason not to take the extra 4 for girthed, so that's exactly what I did. Nigel had a decent rack in response, E-E-M-R-T-U-Y, but he doesn't have any bingos, and he makes a nice play here, the tricky to see Roomy for 28 points, scoring pretty well and keeping a nice ET leave, while also leaving the board wide open for 8-letter bingos, which is in his favor since he's already down early. I draw the Q, but thankfully I have a U to go with it, and I have several decent options. I chose what appears to be the strongest of my options here, Banquet for 38 points, keeping the L. I didn't love the idea of opening an A and an N for Nigel to bingo through, holding an early lead, but at the same time, it's only turn 2 of the game, so I don't want to worry too much about defense yet, and this scores so much better than my other options, I felt it had to be worth it. In response, Nigel did draw a bingo. He has several options, his highest scoring of which score 84 points, either terraced or retraced to the D. It's pretty close here. He goes with terraced. Probably the logic he used was that there are slightly fewer damaging 4-letter words I could have on the bottom left triple through a T than there would be through an R if he had played retraced. Computer simulation does narrowly agree that terraced is better, so clearly, shockingly, Nigel knows what he's doing and he chose the better of his 2 options. And with that, he claws back to within just 6 points. I draw A-I-L-O-P-T-W out of the bag. Not the best draw, but certainly not the worst after my 6-tile play. And I pretty quickly fixate on the bottom left corner. That is clearly where I'm going to want to play, and I have 2 pretty close options that I waffled between for a little while here. Owl for 26 points, keeping A-I-L-P-T, and Watt scoring 7 more points, getting me 33, but keeping a bit of a weaker leave in I-L-O-P. I ultimately decided to make the 7-point sacrifice and play Owl here for a couple of reasons. The biggest reason was that A-I-L-P-T is undeniably a stronger leave than I-L-O-P and is going to bingo more often. I especially felt this way since keeping the A-L ending is nice, as 7-letter words will play here next to girth very nicely. I also figured that this leave goes pretty well with the open end of Banquet, and I'm often going to hit words on that line. The other nice thing is, in the event I don't connect on a bingo, I save PETA, scoring almost 30 points as a backup play under Banquet, whereas the possible play of Watt doesn't really have such a clear backup option. So, given all that, despite Watt scoring 7 more points, I decided it was better to play Owl. The 2 plays, unsurprisingly, rank very closely on a computer simulation, though Owl does seem to have the slight edge, validating my decision. Nigel has a very interesting draw, to say the least, after his bingo, pulling 2 S's, the Z, and the remaining blank. The most obvious play here, which actually I think I would have gone with, is Lutz for 33 points, getting rid of the Z and going for a bingo holding a powerful leave of OSS blank. Instead, Nigel had other ideas. He played Sell for 26 points, giving up 7, but holding the Z, which, if he draws the right tiles, could be very powerful, especially in conjunction with his other S and his blank. Of course, with Nigel holding 2 S's, he doesn't have to worry about spending one, as there is very little upside to having 2 S's as opposed to just 1. Interestingly, computer simulation does seem to pretty clearly favor Lutz by 1 to 2 win percentage points, which is a non-negligible margin. And I do like this better myself. Like I said, I like generally going for bingos more aggressively when you have the blank on a more open board, and I also don't see any immediate places where I feel like the Z is going to score big on the board after Sell. So I think Lutz is a little bit better, but maybe Nigel was worried about the Klutz hook, which could score big. Maybe he had other ideas for a Z. I'm not sure. In any case, obviously, I'm not here to say that the GOAT made a bad play, but it's one that certainly raises some eyebrows. In any case, after sell, I didn't have a great draw after owl, pulling another I and an O. There are no playable bingos here, and I made a nice play, my best by far, Li Tai for 33 points in the spot I purposefully left open for myself after owl. This is clearly better than Pita, as Li Tai, despite not using my P, scores 5 more points by virtue of getting the QI overlap, and OP is a much more flexible leave than ILO for my next turn. Nigel draws an E and an F, and he makes a very interesting play on this turn once again. Instead of something standard like Fizz, getting rid of the Z and keeping the super potent EOST blank leave, which is going to bingo very often on his next turn, he plays OV for just 15 points under the Y of Rumi, making Yo. The idea here is very clear. He is setting up a play like Zest, using his blank for a minimum of 70 points on his next turn. And that's just a minimum. He could certainly draw something there that scores even more, or at least doesn't require using his blank. This is one of Nigel Richards' hallmark setup plays, and it makes a ton of sense in this position. Especially given the more standard option of Fizz doesn't play well to this board. The board has gotten pretty shut down, guys, if you think about it the last couple of turns. Li Tai blocked a ton of lines on the left-hand side of the board, and if Nigel plays Fizz, he completely blocks the center of the board, including 8-letter words through the G. So it could be very difficult for Nigel to bingo on his next turn, even with a leave as strong as EOST blank. So I think taking the initiative and taking the aggressive approach with a leave as powerful as ESTZ blank with the play of makes a ton of sense, and I really like this play from Nigel. And it put me in a very tough position. I knew that Nigel was up to something. After all, I noticed that he could have played the same letters, OF, in several spots for more points, such as next to the G and the I of girth. So I knew he did that for a reason. Nigel Richards doesn't just miss OV for 5 more points, guys. Nigel Richards sacrifices 5 points for a very good reason. And I was in a bit of a pickle here. I figured OV, given that it takes a T, indicated that Nigel likely held a T for oft. I also figured that from Nigel's previous play of Sell, he likely held an S. As with Sell only scoring 26 points, it felt unlikely that Nigel would make that play and use an S without holding another in reserve. So at this point, I pegged Nigel on at least an S and a T. And in that regard, I was right. I certainly didn't realize that he also held a Z and a blank. And my first instinct was to play Map under his last play for 27 points, with the idea, of course, of setting up my own S with maps. The problem, as I said, is I figured Nigel had an S of his own, and he would likely beat me to that spot. So instead, I came up with another idea I'm very proud of. Palm for 21 points under Yo. And what's really cool about this play is it sets up my other P with Yamp. And Yam, it's worth mentioning, does not take an S. Yam is a Hebrew word, and the plural is Yomim. So I basically have exclusive access to use my P there and hit the triple word score for a solid 40 to 45 point play on my next turn if I don't have something better like a bingo. So while I don't block the oft hook, I figure that there's not really a good way for me to block it without giving Nigel something even more dangerous like the S hook with Map. And I also figure if Nigel does happen to bingo with oft or do something big there, he's often going to give me good counterplay on the triple word score at 08 on my next turn for hopefully a large play or even a bingo of my own. So I like this idea, keeping a strong leave to address whatever openings Nigel might create on his next turn, while also preserving a backup play on the bottom right triple with Yamp. Nigel did not use his oft hook as he had something even better, the 101 point bingo of Gauziest from the G in girth, which he played almost instantly, and he soars into his first lead of the game, 254 to 198. I drew pretty well, pulling NOS out of the bag, and I spent a little time here convincing myself that there was no playable bingo through any of the tiles Nigel's bingo just opened. Indeed there isn't, and I ended up making my best play, Pawns, for 41 points, keeping the strong AST leave, capitalizing on the Yamp setup I had made the turn before. However, not to be outdone, Nigel slams down Goatfish for 96 points as a natural bingo through the S in Gauziest, making 197 combined points in just 2 turns, and this play brought him into the lead by over 100, 350 to 239. A very fitting play, it was pointed out by the commentators, because Nigel, of course, is the GOAT of Scrabble, and the GOAT has drawn into Goatfish for 96 points. And unfortunately for me, I did not have such a good draw, pulling the dreaded UW combination out of the bag. So I was definitely feeling a little flustered at this point, since I'd started out really well. I opened with a bingo, I had been holding pace even after Gauziest, and now all of a sudden, just like that, I find myself down to the GOAT by 111 points. That being said, I do have the last S, which could be very powerful, and I certainly wasn't going to give up yet. And here I found another play I am super proud of, something that's not too easy to see, a play through several disconnected tiles down column C, Cutwater for 34 points. Now, as nice as this play is, scoring well and getting rid of my U and my W, it does have one significant drawback that I was fully aware of. I'm still going to be down a lot, so it's not in my best interest to place the C in the middle of the top left part of the board, which I am urgently trying to open, since the C, along with the V, is one of the two tiles in Scrabble that makes no valid two-letter words, so this is going to seal off the possibility of bingoing, at least immediately. That being said, my hope was that I would be able to make a play through the U of Cutwater on the triple on my next turn, and then hopefully be able to set up an S hook, which I would have exclusive access to, given I have the last remaining S. So, kind of a long-term plan here, but it was better than anything else I saw. I did briefly entertain the possibility of something like Awe over here for 23 points, opening a very obvious and high-scoring bingo line, hooking Saw or Taw on the top row. However, this is going to be very easy to block for Nigel, and I felt after he makes basically any play on the top row, I'm kind of back to the drawing board and don't have any good lines. So I felt that Cutwater, putting a little more scoring pressure and going for that long-term plan of a board opening play on the left side, which is currently very much lacking in space, was a better way for me to get back into this game. Nigel, fortunately for me, did not have a great draw, pulling 5 vowels A, B, D, E, E, I, O. And here he makes another heads-up play, Bide, for 33 points. Why do I say this is a heads-up play? After all, it looks very natural, scoring well and taking out the biggest scoring spot on the board. Well, the more natural-looking play would be Bode in the same spot, as normally I's are better than O's. However, this is worse for two reasons. Reason number one is look at the unseen tile pool. There are 5 I's remaining in the bag and only 2 O's. And duplicate I's in particular are very toxic, so playing Bode is going to leave Nigel at significant risk of having 2 or maybe even 3 I's on his rack, whereas keeping the leave of AEO that he kept after Bide is a lot safer. The other drawback with Bode is that Go takes several front hooks, and this allows me potentially board opening and high scoring plays down the M column, whereas Gi, the two-letter word Nigel created with Bide, takes 0 front hooks, so that does not allow me to make a play down column M, and thus this controls the board much better for Nigel, something he of course wants to do given he's going to be going up 110 points. I did not have a great draw here, pulling the J and 2 I's, but thankfully I had a pretty obvious play. I was especially thankful for that as I was getting quite low on time at this point. If you guys aren't aware, Nigel, besides being the greatest Scrabble player of all time, is also an extremely fast player. He is super sharp and finds his plays and makes them very quickly, so as fast as I am, I was definitely feeling a little time pressure at this point, and I was lucky to have an easy play of Joual for 39 points. This is exactly what I wanted from my previous play. I get a high-scoring play here to get me back within range, and I set up a hook for my case S with Joual's, and hopefully if I can get a good draw, and most importantly, not a third I can maybe hit a bingo down the F column and give myself some chances. Let's see if that would happen. Nigel makes another very nice play here. Shocking, I know. His highest scoring play by far, Kaizen for 38 points, keeping the balanced NO leave and maintaining a lead of over 100 points that should outrun any bingo I might draw. And I faced another brutal decision on my next turn. Pulling the X was not really something I wanted here. Sometimes the X is good, but when you're down 100 plus and you need to bingo desperately, it's not what you want to see. And after agonizing for several minutes, I decided to play Deixis, a weird 6-letter word, for 40 points next to the K and the A of Kaizen. It was really not a play I was happy to make, as it gets rid of that super valuable S I was hoping to use for Joual's. However, the problem is I don't really have a good play that keeps the S. The best options I saw were either just dropping the X with XU for 25, or playing XI for 24, which gives up a point but gets rid of one of those pesky I's. The problem with either of these plays, let's say I do XI, is that even if Nigel doesn't have an S, it's not that hard for him to block the Joual's hook. For instance, he could maybe play something vertically through the L, or even a 3-letter word horizontally above the L. And after such a play, I'm going to have almost nowhere to bingo on this board, and being down 100 points, I am basically dead in the water, so I did not feel I could afford to do this. After Deixis, while I do get rid of my S, I do at least create a threat through the D on the top row that Nigel's going to have to address, and I figured after that, maybe I could still hit a bingo through the L in Joual. It's going to be very unlikely, but it's possible. There was also the possibility that if Nigel plays to the D, he might open another line for 7s under whatever he plays there, and I could capitalize in that spot. Again, it's a long shot, but it's possible. It felt like more of a chance than playing just XI. Another play I did briefly entertain was playing XIS with Jouals, hoping to draw one of the remaining A's for Axis. However, again, even if Nigel doesn't have an A, it's not that hard for him to just block this spot by playing next to the X on the left, and I felt after that I was going to be pretty dead. So again, all these reasons are why I decided to play Deixis. My win percentage here is probably below 1%, but I felt this maximized whatever slim chances I had. And after this, Nigel made another fairly mind-boggling play, Noddy, for just 10 points. Why is this mind-boggling? Well, a couple reasons. Number one, Nigel has a very high-scoring play here of Yod for 35, 25 more than the play he made. The obvious reason why Nigel would not have chosen this play is because it leaves that glaring bingo line I just created with the D and Deixis wide open, and looking at the unseen tile pool, there are some damaging bingos I could have, for instance, something like Groveled or Involved. Now, Involved would be the highest scoring bingo I could possibly have there. It would score 95 points. Yod does put Nigel up by 104, so I would still be down 9 after Involved, and I think Nigel should win all or almost all endgames. I haven't gone through and permuted every possible one. I would imagine Yod wins essentially 100% of the time for Nigel. That being said, he decided to go with Noddy to block that spot and force any bingo I might have to score even less. It is possible I could still bingo with something like Reviver on the 2 row, making NE and OR. That would actually tie the game after Noddy. And I'll be drawing a single tile out of the bag after such a bingo, as there are currently 5 in the bag, Noddy plays 4, so Nigel leaves just a single tile in the bag. And Nigel's idea is that if I were to bingo there, I'd only have 1 tile, so while I will be playing out, I'm not going to be scoring all that many points. After all, it's hard to score a lot of points with just 1 tile. And Nigel would probably be able to respond with a play like Ligon on the top, or something, at least on the top left triple word score, that would easily outrun whatever single tile outplay I could have. So Noddy, just like Yod, should win all or essentially all the time for Nigel, just taking a bit of a different approach. Now you might be wondering, why wouldn't Nigel at least play Dandy in the same spot, since it scores the same and it gets rid of his duplicate A's? Normally you don't want to keep duplicates in Scrabble. Well, the idea here is very deep, as commentator and former North American champion Josh Sokol pointed out. After Dandy, if I play several of my available bingos on row 2 ending in ER and then draw a V out of the bag, then I'm going to have 2 spots for my V. One that I just created with Dev, and the other one that was already there with Voss on the 6th row. And thus, Nigel, while he would probably still win, wouldn't be able to V-stick me and get a massive amount of spread. However, after Nigel's play of Noddy, if I bingo in that same spot ending in ER and draw a V, now I'm only going to have a single spot, namely Voss. And then Nigel can drop a single tile next to AS, V-stick me, and rack up a ton of spread. It's probably not going to affect his win percentage, but Nigel always tries to play to maximize his spread whenever he feels like he's always going to win, and this is just another testament to his greatness, seeing this several turns ahead. In any case, after Noddy, I very much did not have a bingo. Holding GIILORV, I decided here to throw in the towel and play Vigor for 25, also with the idea of conserving some spread, as given the tournament is only half over, and we were all pretty close in our point spread, trying to lose by as little as possible was definitely in my best interest. It's worth mentioning I could have tried something like fishing off my G with Gas, hoping to draw one of the 2 unseen E's for Relievo, making no on row 2. However, the problem is there's only 1 spot, and Nigel was going to certainly block it. If I was playing a much weaker player, I might maybe try this, but I'm playing Nigel Richards. Nigel Richards is not going to miss my threat of Relievo, and Nigel Richards is not going to fail to block it. There is no reason to do this. I'm better off just accepting defeat and playing Vigor to conserve some spread, and hopefully, as long as I draw anything other than probably the remaining V, going out on my next move. However, unfortunately for me, I do draw the remaining V, and that leaves Nigel with a final rack of AAEENNR, and here we were treated to another display of Nigel Richards' brilliance. There are a bunch of reasonable looking endgame plays, including the cool Entera for 18 points, his highest scoring play on the right. But here, Nigel astutely observes that with ILV, I only have 1 playable outplay, Vil, to the L of Joual. And it's certainly going to be in his best interest to block it. However, there are several ways to block it, and he finds his best one, the rather bizarre-looking Earn, for just 6 points, keeping the questionable-looking AAEN leave. Why is he keeping AAEN? Well, in the same spot he could have played Entera, he is now preserving an outplay of ante, making 3 overlaps. And the problem is, while I can block this, it's going to be worse for me to block it than to not block it. Why? Well, look at my remaining tiles again of ILV. Really, the only way I could block this is to play either T or till from the T, and that's going to leave me with a V that, once again, I only have a single spot for, namely Voss, thanks to Nigel's play of Naughty over Dandy on the previous turn that I was just talking about. So if I play something like Till, then Nigel is going to just play something like AAS for 5, blocking my spot for my V. I'm going to have to pass, and Nigel will just dink off one tile at a time, racking up a lot more spread than if I just play Voss immediately and let him go out. So the crazy thing about this, guys, is not that Nigel saw it, it's that he saw it in like 30 seconds, maybe even less. It was shockingly quick between when I played Vigor and when Nigel played Earn. And even for Nigel's standards, this is a shockingly quick endgame, because this, well, yeah, it's fairly solvable, I think, for a top tournament player. I do believe I could have solved this. I would not have been able to solve it in 30 seconds. It probably would have taken me at least 3 minutes. My theory is that Nigel might have been preparing for this when I was still thinking, since I thought for a minute or two before I decided to throw in the towel and play Vigor. He probably figured, based on the unseen pool, that Vigor was a fairly likely play, and he had probably been planning ahead based on me playing Vigor and thinking what would be the best endgame. That's my guess. It's possible he also just legitimately calculated this from scratch in 30 seconds. We'll never know, but regardless, a super impressive play by Nigel, and certainly no surprise to see him play the optimal endgame, even in an endgame as complicated as this one. In any case, like I said, I did correctly realize here that playing Till on the right would land me in even deeper trouble after a V-stick, so I just conceded Nigel's nice endgame play here, played Voss for 14, and allowed him to finish the game with ante for 17 points, with a final score after he gets 4 points for my unplayed INL of Nigel 458, me 391. An excellent game here, and I feel like we both played super well. Certainly not surprising, of course, to see the GOAT play well. And yeah, I feel very good about all of my plays here. No regrets really about any of my decisions, no clear mistakes, and I got off to a good start. Just the gauziest and goatfish double whammy for a combined 197 points was a little bit too much for me to overcome. But certainly no shame in losing to the GOAT, especially with a well-played game like this one. Super fun, as always. Always a special opportunity to get to play against the greatest Scrabble player of all time. I did have one other game against Nigel Richards at this tournament. It was not on stream. I will be covering that in due time, but probably not in the very near future, as there are several other games which, frankly, I think were more interesting that I want to go over first. But nevertheless, especially if you're a big Nigel fan, after all, who isn't, be on the lookout for that video in the coming weeks. In any case, guys, thank you all so much for your support and watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed this and enjoyed getting a little bit more of a glimpse into Nigel Richards' play and thought process. I certainly did. As much as I would like to win this game, I'm still super happy with how I played and was super happy for the opportunity to play him after my last game against him was a whopping 8 years ago. So that's it for this one, guys. Appreciate your support once again. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all soon for the next video. Bye-bye.